Thank you. So yeah, before I start, hi everyone. And I wanted to ask you, who of you does use Instapaper, Readability, Pocket, or any other read it later service? Hands up, please. Okay, cool. And who uses AdBlocker? Hands up again. Interesting. Okay. So that was pretty much what I expected, and that's also pretty much sums up why I'm here today. So I'm going to talk about distraction-free reading experiences. And let's see if that works. That doesn't seem to work. Ah, right. Great. All right. Distractions, right? So yeah, I think it concerns every one of us. And before I go into the main part of my talk, I first want to share how I actually discovered this topic. It all started when I read Kenya Hara's book, White, a few months ago, in which Kenya Hara writes about the use and the potential of the color white in design. And while I was reading it, I couldn't help but notice how quickly I became immersed in it, whether I was in a train full of grumpy commuters or at a coffee shop packed with over-caffeinated people. I was able to instantly fade out all the noise going on around me. And I found this quite remarkable, and it wasn't just because it was a book, really, but it was because this book was designed in a way that was quite contrary to the noising and distracting reality of today's web. So, as user experience designers, we are always obsessed of making delightful experiences. But what makes an experience actually delightful? Is it when it's effortless, like loading new tweets on Twitter? Or is it when it's seamless, when data is automatically loaded without you two explicitly doing it? Well, I think it's when people experience flow, when they become involved in an experience as a whole. Because if you think about it, what I just mentioned, effortless, seamless, they just contribute to flow. If you're loading new tweets on Twitter, it keeps you in the flow of the app, right? So a lot of research has been done on the topic of flow. And Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi, which is a really hard name to pronounce, by the way, he defined flow as the holistic experience that people feel when they act with total involvement. Now, what I found interesting was when I read his book, he also mentioned that people who experience flow, they actually find this experience highly enjoyable. They like it, they get a sense of ecstasy and a sense of inner clarity. And you know, the more I thought about it, the more I realized, well, it pretty much sums up the emotion I want my website's visitors to feel, right? But unfortunately, today's world isn't a world that embraces flow as a concept, because the world we live in is, in fact, a world of distractions. Now, distractions have always been a natural constituent of our lives, but with the rise of technology, a circus of notifications and all the noise going on around us, it becomes harder and harder to focus on the task at hand. So a few weeks ago, I went to a store around the corner and I saw this cigarette advertising on top. This is your moment, right? And when I looked at it, I thought that's actually pretty fucked up, right? I mean, why would a cigarette brand advertise a moment of enjoyment, a moment of self-consciousness, a moment of independence and freedom with a girl staring at her smartphone, right? And then it hit me, because this is the reality we live in nowadays, right? So there's a nice quote from Dietmar Dahmen, who spoke at TED conference, and he said that first we invent technology, then this technology reinvents us. So if you think about it, technological revolutions like the first iPod, the Walkman, the iPhone, they didn't just change the way we think about technology, they completely changed the way we embrace it in our daily lives. The phone that was once used for making calls now became the epicenter of all our digital communication, and at the same time, it became a major source of distractions. It's like a small kid constantly begging for your attention, and it becomes harder and harder to say no and to keep focusing on the stuff that actually matters, right? So today we're not going to change society here, so bear with me. But instead, we're going to focus on distractions that are happening on the screen. And avoiding on-screen distractions is all about putting readers first. Now, I found a good way to explain the concept of on-screen distractions is what I call the bird paradox. Who has played Flappy Bird by now? Most of you. Okay, so for those who don't know it, it's that really addicting game that makes you realize real quick how much you suck at it, because it's really, really hard. It's a really difficult game. Now, you're probably wondering, what does this game have to do with distraction-free reading experiences? Well, quite a lot, as it turns out, because this game is all about focus. The slightest distraction results in an immediate death and an awful lot of frustration. So people at IA can actually tell stories about it. And it wasn't until a friend of mine revealed me his secret that I was able to increase my score. He said, well, Adrian, if you want to get better in this game, you need to stop focusing on the score. Because I was always counting, you know, I was always showing, I already got 5, you know, it's really good. And then I realized, well, that's not the way to go. And what he was actually saying is that I should fade out the noise going on around there, right? And that's what I did. So obviously, creating distraction-free reading experiences is not the same as designing a game. But why is it then that we put so much bullshit on our screens that become a huge impediment for our readers, right? And that's what I want to talk about today. So I put together 9 key ingredients of what I think make up distraction-free reading experiences. And it starts with the most fundamental of all, typography and content. Now, typography and content builds the fundamental building block of everything that is meant to be read. But so much has been said about it that I won't go into detail here. It's important to keep in mind, though, that they have the most profound impact on the way people perceive and interpret our website. So do yourself and your readers a favor, get to know type and mind about content. And by the way, practicaltypography.com is a really great resource to start to get to know type. There is an article that basically learns you type basics in 10 minutes. You're not going to be an expert, but you're going to be so much cooler after it. So, on imitation. When it comes to designing, we often lend concepts from the real world that have proven valuable and useful and adapt them to the digital counterpart. And we do so for good reasons. I mean, when we see a trash bin on a screen, we quickly make basic assumptions on how we can interact with it, even though we don't know what technical implications it actually has. And Eric Spiekerman once said that people read best what they read most. So obviously, imitating books, newspapers, and magazines has worked so well because we have been reading them for decades, right? So if we are to choose a reference or a metaphor to create a good reading experience, it's tempting to take the book as a reference, right? But from a UX point of view, the book isn't as flawless as one might think. So I spent a lot of time thinking about the characteristics of the book in terms of user experience. And what I realized is one of my main concerns about it really is that it's sliced in arbitrary pieces. But when you write content or when you read content, you don't think in terms of pages, you think about content, right? So pages are, in fact, an impediment. When you buy a book about programming, for instance, then it gets really obvious. If the code is spread among different pages, you end up leaving back and forth, which is a terrible experience, right? So how about we stop to implement page flip effects and the like that unnecessarily expose our readers to the weakness of the real world, which is exactly what Apple did in iOS 7. In iOS 7, Apple decided to give the user the option to choose the reading mode between page flip effects and scrolling. So they harnessed the advantages of technology and came up with something that feels more natural to the medium. Now, to be fair, most of us might not redesign the next iBooks app or design the next iBooks app. So let's get on a more practical example, pagination. Have you ever looked for some design tips on Google, and then you get these typical headlines like 10 ways to create better headlines, 15 ways to have a better web design, 10 fonts that make you rich, and something like that. And then at some point you want to, when you go to that website, you want to read, right? You want to scan if there is something interesting to discover there. But unfortunately, that's not what's happening because you didn't take into account the guy who decided to paginate the layout. So what you really end up with is something like this, this, or even this. Now, honestly, does anyone care about how these buttons look? No, because people don't come to our websites to push buttons. They want information, right? So that really got me wondering, why is it then that so many websites still rely on this pattern? Is it because they care about their users? Yeah, that would be nice, but no. Who cares about users anyway, right? So if those people, the problem with this is that people who argue that ripping apart content and putting it back together makes a good reading experience is just the person you don't want to work with. Because if they're honest, they will at least tell you that they in fact just want more page reloads so they can show more ads, because more ads are always better, right? That's not what Google learned. Google learned from user testing that people always prefer the single page version over the paginated layouts. And there are only a few exceptions where this statement doesn't hold true. And that's when content is extraordinarily long, or when it's very heavy on bandwidth. So if there's really a lot of media going on, then it makes sense to separate it. But if after all this guy is still not convinced that you stop using pagination, tell him to go print a book instead, you know. It's also a nice thing to do. So another pattern we rely on heavily on the web is position fixed. Now, I want to introduce you to the brand called Focus Lab LLC. It's a design studio from the US, and they have a really beautiful design overall, nice typography, it's very carefully crafted. And once you start scrolling, you get this typical behavior. You get this mobile navigation bar on top. Now, honestly, whose logo is so beautiful that it deserves such a huge amount of space on a page, right? I mean, yeah, that's pretty crazy. So the other thing about using this to that extent is that this navigation builds huge anticipation. So when you click on that mobile button, you expect that there's something really awesome going to happen since it deserves so much space. But what's actually happening is this. So I found this rather disappointing, and it gets even worse when you consider the context in which people nowadays, if someone is hitting up this page from Twitter, he gets a second position fix bar, and a third of the content is now covered with something that no one actually needs. Right? So we wanted to come up with a less distracting solution. And when we redesigned holzbrick.com, one of the leading media companies in the world, we had to break down all the information to one single page. And we knew that this page will probably get pretty long, so we needed to give the user a means to navigate on his mobile, otherwise he would just get lost, right? So we knew we would have to put the navigation, a fixed thing there. And as you can see, we also have this bar, you have a logo there. Oh, wait, let's see if this laser pointer, oh, great, okay. So we have this laser pointer here, or this logo. Right, so we have this logo there, and then we have this navigation, and we have the mobile button, right? So what happens here is, once you start scrolling, the behavior is different, because the only thing that scrolls within the viewport is the mobile menu button, right? And this solution results in a significantly less use of screen estate, and by aligning it to the right, it is less interfering with the actual reading process, because when you read, your eyes always tend to align themselves on the left part of the text, and if you interfere with that space, it breaks the reading experience. So, for the sake of completeness, I wanted to show you that it's now possible to have a minimal user interface on iOS 7 in Safari. It's really easy to do. It basically gets rid of the bar at the bottom, and it by default makes the top bar small. And what it does, it's really easy to do actually. You can just embed this meta tag on the top of your page and you're done. So if you think this could contribute to the reading experiences of your website, you might give it a shot. Now, the takeaway of this point basically derives by something that Mike Montero said. He said, a good designer finds an elegant way to put everything you need on a page. A great designer convinces you half that shit is unnecessary. So this kind of leads me to the next point, sidebars. Now, lots of people still don't have a mobile-first approach. Who does mobile-first here? Okay, cool. So if you don't have a mobile-first approach, your design process for an article page of a blog, for instance, could look something like this. You start with an image, you add some titles, maybe some text, some more images, some more text, and at the end, you might decide to add comments on the page, right? And it's at this point that you pretty much got it down to the essence, right? Everything that is truly needed to experience content is there. But what happens at this point is that designers suddenly put it into context. And it's at this point that they realize, hey, there's still so much white space around here. So what are we going to do with this? And usually it doesn't take long until a guy comes around the corner and says, hey, I've got an awesome idea. Let's add a sidebar there. Because sidebars are awesome, because sidebars are cool, and everyone needs them, right? It's at this point that you introduced a place that suddenly grows and grows to become a cluttered place full of shit, right? Because the sidebar will basically be the center where all the links that didn't fit anywhere else will be hosted, right? So yeah. It's also at this point that you open the box of Pandora and ads will start sneaking in, and what you really end up with is a doomed reading experience no one wants to see. So Oliver Reichenstein, he once said that the only side column you look at is your own side column. Now, there are probably some people who really think that their sidebar is really different and that is really good. So for them, there is also something you can at least think of. So make sure if you have a sidebar that you put relevant information in there, that it's unobtrusive, that you apply a vertical rhythm to the sidebar so it integrates more seamlessly with the overall design, and that you have enough white space around the content. But generally, I really recommend to imagine how it feels, how liberating it is when you imagine how you crush this sidebar, you know, because it's really awesome. And in most of the cases, you probably won't regret it. So on images. Now, images have a huge impact on the way we perceive and on the way we perceive websites because they convey emotion very quickly, right? But surprisingly, we rarely question on how we can make use of images in a more effective and in a less distracting way. So Cosmetrics, they published an article in which they discussed how to make proper use of images, and among others, they said that the main image should always be above the headline. Now, why is that? If the main image is not above the headline, it will cut the reading experience. So you start with the title, and then the main image comes and it interrupts you in your reading flow, right? Another thing to note is that images should always be aligned to the right. If you embed images within the text, you do better by aligning it to the right because, as I said, it will be less interfering with the reading flow. Another thing we need to be aware of is that captions of images, they are read 300 times more than actual body copy. So we better make damn sure that we put some interesting stuff in there, right? Now, users navigate based on a cognitive schema that is derived from thousands of websites that they have visited. And what they learned is that content that is placed on specific areas of the screen is usually not important, and people refer to this phenomenon as banner blindness. So this content, lots of people will actually not even consciously see it. So if you're still thinking about sidebars now, it might now be the moment to really let go, right? So what about image content? Many websites make use of stock images like this. Now, what does this image actually communicate? It's really interesting, right? Because you know that they have beautiful pens, and they have really nice suits and laptops, and they work together in a team, but it looks really fake, right? So we should use images in a more reasonable way, and just if they just look nice, really don't just use them because they look nice. They should convey valuable information that supports the content. So, on animations and parallax. So, I wrote a lot about, and I thought about animations. And what I think is that animations can be a great asset when it comes to designing user interfaces, because they support the mental model of the user. So it's a great tool there. But when it comes to reading, animations are actually a direct distraction. So, and one thing we need to learn is that people don't want to use our designs. What they really want is information, right? So I went to this page a few weeks ago to get new plugins for my subline text. And I was really excited because the page looked pretty promising at the beginning. But then I started scrolling. And that felt pretty weird. Social media buttons on crack, right? So I was really wondering, suddenly you wonder, what am I even doing here? How did I end up here? And that's exactly the questions you don't want people to have when they're browsing your website, right? So another interesting article, which I actually didn't read, but you can tell me what it's about after it, is an article from The Verge. And this article is pretty interesting, actually, because what they do is it adapts to the device you're accessing it on. So if you're on an iOS device, it has an iOS branding. If you're on an Android device, it has an Android branding, etc. And once you start scrolling, what you get is this. Now, what seems really funny and really creative at the beginning becomes quickly quite annoying, right? Because they don't build any anticipation anymore. At some point, it really becomes predictable, and you think, okay, another bubble, yeah, so cool, right? So the takeaway here is we should make use of animations in a smart way. Animations should never be used for their own sake, but rather to support content and functionality, right? If users leave when no animations are present, it's usually a pretty good indicator that your content is not as good as you thought it is. So, letting people read what they came for. We often feel overwhelmed by all the navigational choices we have when you go on a website. We have sub-navigation, we have main navigation, we have previous article, we have next article, we have category navigation. There are tons of navigations, so it's crazy. And I found TechCrunch to be a good example for this. When you go to their website, you get this. Cupcakes, everything. And once, if you think about it, the only reason that companies like TechCrunch exist is because of their content, right? And that's remarkable, because only 1/3 of the screen is actually why I came to this website in the first place. So that kind of feels like going to a restaurant and having the waiter bring you the bill before you even ordered the dish, right? You wouldn't do that in real life. So why is it then that we do it on the web, right? You don't feel welcome. You feel pressured and overwhelmed. So the less is more mantra applies to the web because we don't like to have too much choice. Too much choice increases our costs. Now again, if you go to a restaurant, I'm hungry. You know, I didn't eat. That's why I'm always talking about restaurants. So if you're eating a burger, right, you can't eat the cheeseburger at the same time, and you can't have a steak at the same time. So every additional menu on the card is a meal that you're not going to have tonight. And the same applies on the web, of course. So let's imagine that there is a potential match here on the screen while you're already reading an article. you will subconsciously already be thinking about the next article, and you will think, actually, this article is okay, but I rather read the other one. So we lose commitment, and we lose focus, and we get mentally distracted, right? So in many ways, limitations are liberating. Information architecture tends to shift away from a top-down to a bottom-up approach, because people don't start using our websites from the homepage anymore. They dive in deep down the rabbit hole with search engines or any tool they use. And the only thing that a user is interested in at this moment is if his needs matches what he sees on the screen, right? So Mandy Brown, she developed a model from a list apart, and she said that first we need to get readers into flow. And we can do that by offering them a compelling introduction, a punchy headline, a good image that is in context and relevant to the article. And then once people start reading, we leave them alone during the reading process. It is not until the end that we show them additional content to pursue their interests. So in many ways, information architecture is about resisting the urge to put all kinds of nonsense on our screens, right? Which leads me to the last and final point of this presentation. Dealing with advertising. Now, Brad Frost says that advertising is bullshit. Now, I think we need a more differentiated view on that matter, because people actually do like advertising if advertising is good. We share good advertising, we go to YouTube, and then we suddenly question ourselves, why am I watching YouTube ads in my free time, right? So the problem of advertising really is relevance. And we shouldn't forget that the reason the web is what it is nowadays is because of advertising. The reason we can go on so many pages and access information, great quality content for free, is because of advertising. So as I said, the main problem is relevance, and Howard Gossage once said that nobody reads ads, people read what interests them, and sometimes that's an ad. So there are many ways to deal with advertising. One way not to do it is the way Forbes magazine does it. So I was trying to read an article about management, and when I went to Forbes, what I saw is this. So a lot of ice cream going on my screen. And then I was wondering if all managers are not secretly a bunch of notorious ice cream addicts, that ad will probably not have any effect, right? But let's imagine that managers actually do like ice cream. Then it only gets more frustrating because you realize that ice cream is not available in your country, right? And that's ridiculous. So let's imagine that the user is so nice and even actually perseveres here and goes to the next page. So what he's going to end up with is this. So we have exactly all these kinds of patterns again. We have a bar, a nice bar on top. We have another bar at the bottom that, by the way, blinks all the time. And you have this weird thing. And so as you can see now, that metaphor of the bird actually pretty much fits what I said, right? Because this bird, not the bird, actually the reading experience, it challenges you. It challenges you, hey, can you read me? Right? It's like a game, right? So what's the consequence here? Well, simple. I stopped reading, and I did so for two reasons. First off, I think it's insulting for the reader, because we need to respect the reader's time. And if we just throw all kinds of bullshit of them, it's insulting. And an often overlooked point is what I think is, it's also highly insulting for the people who write text, because writing with text is really a painful process. I mean, it takes so much time and dedication to write good content. And if your content is consumed in such an environment, that's not cool, right? So obviously we can't change the content of advertising. We can't always select every ad, but we can embed advertising in a more gentle way. So I found a good way is what Quartz does. Quartz magazine, when you visit their websites, you get this compelling introduction on top that doesn't just show you an image just because it's nice, but it also gives you a sense of orientation. And once you scroll to the bottom of the article, you get additional venues to pursue your interests, and at the bottom you get an advertisement. And this advertisement isn't bad at all. I mean, it's one advertisement. It is very, very notable. You can see it clearly. And what's interesting is that they actually learned that users actually like ads if they are good. And they also learned that quality usually trumps quantity. So there is the advertising gentleman that says, don't make people guess if something is an ad or not. Try choosing ads that are relevant if you can, and quality over quantity, and keep it unobtrusive, right? As soon as advertising is interfering with the reading experiences, it's really terrible advertising because it destructs everything your business model is based upon. So if you ever wondered how obtrusive advertising and pop-ups feel in real life, that pretty much sums it up. So to end this, I think there are moments of truth in life, you know, these rare moments in which other people judge our abilities, our character, our performances. And whether that's at a job interview or at an exam or even when speaking at a conference. And when we think about that, we need to be aware of what we need to decide who we actually want to be. Do we want to be the guys who contribute to the noisy and distracting reality that the web is nowadays? Or do we want to be the guys who push the web forward and help it to become a better place to read and share information? And I leave that up to you guys. Thank you.
Thank you, Adrian. That was great. And not distractful at all. So that's good. Who wants to ask questions? Are there any? We still have a bunch of books available for the first few questions. And you can collect them during the break. Just remind yourself to collect during the break because we have a pile like that from yesterday. Oh. It's okay, you can get all of them if you want.
The question of cultures, you know, your examples are perhaps in English for Anglo-Saxon communities or something like that. Between you as German-speaking, difference from Switzerland, Germany to France to English newspapers. What's your experience on that?
You mean on an international perspective?
Yeah, exactly. In the perception of readers in every content, because I'm reading, for example, in France, Le Monde and Die Zeit in Germany. They have a really different approach of how to introduce user or reader to the information.
Mm-hmm. Okay, interesting. Well, to be honest, I think that these topics that I covered here, they are quite general. They are quite broad. So in that sense, I think that they are not culturally dependent. And what I have to say, though, is that I don't have any experience with designing websites where the reading direction is different, you know, and that might be a point to research on more extensively. Yeah, can't answer the question in a more direct and concise way. Sorry.
Hi. About the sidebars, I was wondering why, for example, WordPress, that's such popular platform of websites, why do they still use it, and why it's so popular. What's your opinion? Why they are still there, the sidebars, and even if it's such annoying element in interfaces.
Yeah, great question. When you think about the way people buy websites on WordPress, like themes and stuff, it really depends on the level of knowledge these people have, and they're usually not user experience designers. They just want a website to get their stuff up and running, and at this point they just think, sidebars are really cool, as I said in the presentation, right? Because most people who are not experienced and think about that, they just think that the sidebar is something that they will miss if it's not there. And also, there are good themes for WordPress and there are bad themes for WordPress. So, and good themes actually do not have sidebars quite often. So the problem with WordPress is just that since this platform is so immensely popular, there's also a lot of bad stuff going on the platform. Many bad themes, but many good themes as well. So it's just hard to find good themes, right?
So, yeah, I wanted to ask, do you really think a sidebar is something really bad, or
Yes.
because
Yes, yes, I do
Yeah,
really
no,
think that
but I
sidebars
think
are
a
the bane of a
sidebar-
web designer's existence.
yeah, but I really think there is a semantic behind a side note or sidebar. We know it from books for a long time that some information you want to convey that is depending on the whole content on the page, for example, like additional information or something, that you put it in a side note. And a side note is something semantically and something that you can really use. So in that context, I don't think it's something bad.
Totally agree. The thing is, when we talk about sidebars, I'm not talking about side notes because, as you said, semantically it's not exactly the same, right? Because the sidebar is the way people think about sidebars is that it's a collection of links that take you to another place. But if you think about side notes or side contents, like we have it on Medium, where you can have contents and side contents inline, then it works great, right? But it's because the user explicitly requests it and because he can profit from it. Another good point that you're making is when you're talking about navigation patterns, when sometimes we get on media platforms where you get this quite often that you have filters on the left. Then it's not on the right sidebar, but it's on the left. Surprisingly, people actually perceive sidebars that are on the left better than on the right. And there it also makes completely sense, right? It's just in general, it's really easier to say that we should get rid of them because in most of the cases people don't take advantages of things like side notes that you just mentioned on the web. I think they're extensively used in books, but on the webs you rarely see them. But if you clearly, it's also a matter of how you solve this from a graphical and design perspective, right? Because if you make side notes and you show clearly the context to which these side notes apply, like to which paragraph in between the content, then it works pretty well. I just think that in general, sidebars are a really difficult thing to deal with, also because users often perceive them as irrelevant, right? And that's something we need to be aware of. So.
Hello.
He's winking.
Yeah. I have the mic. Okay. A question occurred for me when I read an article, for example, in Medium article, so it's quite clean and quite focused on content. My question is when, or do you have figures or research or something like that, when do people like me and like anybody will understand that it's boring and painful to read stuff that are not clean? And does it evolve in the good way it should, or are we going to find these websites that we are encountering, as you said, like TechCrunch or other ones that are not focusing on content? Does it evolve in a good way, or are we going to have this for 10, 50, 20 years, more years?
Yeah, the only thing that I can say is that when people go to a website like medium.com, they somehow feel that this design is it works, it is beautiful. They don't even necessarily think that it's beautiful, but it just works because they can read on it. But when design is bad, it's at this point that people will realize that that the design doesn't work out. And TechCrunch, once you're on an article page and you scroll a little down, it's the typography in itself is not that bad. What's bad though is that they always show advertising and other places to pursue their reading. But I do not have statistics from TechCrunch itself on how their redesign process changed the amount of visitors they have on their websites.
My turn?
Yeah. We have another question on the right.
So it's not really a question, but you know this app Sprites? It's a speed reading app which goes even farther in your thinking and just display one word at a time and flash them really quickly and display them in a special way. I didn't really trust in this, and I tried it and it really works. It makes you read much faster. I'm pretty slow reader, but this really helps. That is not a question, so that's it.
Yeah, I was just wondering if I need to. Yeah, but I also do. I actually use it too. I really like it. Yeah. The only problem that I have is that when there are images, sometimes it gets a little bumpy. Yeah. But it's still an experimental technology. But yeah, well, this technology is reading the ultimate distraction-free reading experiences that you get, right?
Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Adrian.